The year is 1962, the year that our planet was almost completely destroyed by a nuclear holocaust. It all started on October 14th, 1962, when a United States U-2 high-altitude military plane photographed new missile installations in central Cuba. This aircraft was able to fly at such high altitudes. No country had the capability of shooting down such a plane. Not even the Soviet Union at this time, who were responsible for the newly found construction missile sites. In addition, on the following day, October 15th, CIA analysts determined these missiles could deliver nuclear payloads to almost anywhere within the United States. October 16th, President John F. Kennedy discusses this provocation with his military team to determine how to respond to this new threat. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara offers his advice. First option, diplomatic action with Cuban Presidente Fidel Castro and with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Second option, McNamara suggests a naval quarantine of Cuba. Lastly, an air attack to destroy the missile installations, which risks killing and wounding thousands of Russian soldiers and risking WW3 with possible nuclear retaliation by the Soviets. Kennedy decides on option 2, the naval quarantine of Cuba, which is technically a blockade that is an act of war. October 22nd. JFK gives a dramatic 18-minute address from the Oval Office, revealing to the country that America has irreversible evidence that the Russians have installed nuclear missiles 90 miles from the Florida border. He further broadcasts that the US will stop and board any ships carrying weapons to Cuba, plus demanding that Khrushchev withdraw all the newly installed missiles. Furthermore, Kennedy sends a letter to Chairman Khrushchev. I quote, "The one thing that has most concerned me has been the possibility that your government would not correctly understand the will and determination of the United States in any situation, since I have not assumed that you or any other sane man would, in this nuclear age, deliberately plunge the world into war, which it is crystal clear no country could win, and which could only result in catastrophic consequences to the world, including the aggressor." End quote. October 23. Khrushchev responds to JFK's letter by rejecting the pressure to have the Soviets withdraw the missiles in question, which the Soviet leader contends, I quote, "are intended solely for defensive purposes." End quote. Kennedy responds bluntly, reminding Khrushchev that he started the crisis by secretly sending missiles to Cuba. End quote. The great ambassador Adlai Stevenson expounds the concern to the United Nations Security Council with this quote directed to United Nations Soviet Ambassador Zorin. I quote, "All right, sir. Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no." End quote. Zorin replied, I quote, "This is not a court of law. I do not need to provide a yes or no answer." End quote. Stevenson then responded, I quote, "You can answer yes or no. You have denied they exist. I want to know if I understood you correctly. I am prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I am also prepared to present the evidence in this room." End quote. Many historians believe that these comments were the pinnacle drama of the Cuban Missile Crisis as the world learned of these exchanges. US ships have by this time entered into the waters near and around Cuba. Plus, Russian submarines have ominously progressed into the Caribbean, indicating as if they will endeavour to break the blockade. However, fortunately for the world, the commercial ships transporting the military supplies to Cuba stopped before trying to run the blockade. October 24th. Khrushchev sends an angry letter to JFK condemning Kennedy of threatening Mother Russia. I quote, "You are no longer appealing to reason, but wish to intimidate us." End quote. October 25th. The Americans found the Russian freighters loaded with missiles and missile parts turned and returned to European ports. However, One ship, the Bucharest, an oil tanker, passes through the blockade on its way to Cuba. It did not stop. Kennedy knowingly realized that Khrushchev needed a political cover, allowed the Bucharest to pass through the quarantine, because it wasn't carrying any contraband. An excellent call on Kennedy's part. October 26. Castro, upon hearing that the ships heading for Cuba turned back, sends a letter to Khrushchev immediately demanding he launch a nuclear-first strike against the United States. Thankfully, the Russian president disregards this letter. Then Khrushchev writes a letter to Kennedy in which he asks the US president to work with him to de-escalate the situation and safeguard the world from thermonuclear conflagration. Another famous quote from Katie Stallard Blanchette indicates the importance of Khrushchev's letter to JFK. First quote, "This letter was a significant moment in the crisis and involved political risks on both sides. For Khrushchev to make this emotional appeal to the US president, risking the appearance of weakness, and for Kennedy to accept the Soviet premier's sentiment as genuine, risking the appearance of gullibility." End quote. October 27th. Then, on this day, the tables turned, and the world again faced nuclear annihilation with the shoot-down of a US U-2 pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson. Again, war appeared to be imminent. Kennedy's advisors wanted to strike Cuba with an air assault, but Kennedy correctly surmised that Khrushchev had not himself given the order for the plane to be destroyed. The incident prompts both leaders to understand that the situation is spiraling dangerously out of control. Again, to save face with the Russian people, Khrushchev contacts Kennedy in another letter, challenging the US to withdraw all missiles from Turkey. Kennedy, in turn, promises not to attack Cuba after the Russian withdrawal. That evening, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, visits with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin and indicates the United States pledge to remove its missiles from Turkey, but could not announce publicly. Again, the world dodges a bullet, and the likelihood of nuclear war subsides. October 28th. Khrushchev writes an open letter to Kennedy, indicating that all Soviet missiles will be withdrawn from Cuba. The Kennedy White House depicted the removal as the result of the president's tough stance in the face of Soviet aggression. Others say the resolution of the crisis owed to the president's commitment to negotiate and find common ground in a dangerous nuclear war situation. A personal note. In 2007, this author had the great pleasure of being Sergei Khrushchev's personal driver. In fact, because of his return flight was cancelled, the day after his speech promoting his new book, The Creation of a Superpower, Dr. Khrushchev and this author had a wonderful conversation concerning this very subject, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Here is the breaking news. During those 13 days in October 1962, the US and Russia came within 15 minutes of total nuclear war. The Russians knew that the American military was recommending an outright assault on Cuba after the U-2 plane was shot down on October 27. However, unknown to the world, Nikita Khrushchev had given the Russian generals in Cuba the authority to use short-range nuclear missiles if America invaded Cuba. If Kennedy listened to his military Joint Chiefs of Staff, our world would most likely be a radioactive wasteland, devastated beyond comprehension. Secondly, some say Castro had Kennedy assassinated the following year in 1963. Nate, Dr. Khrushchev exclaimed. Sergei continued that he believed American CIA, American Mafia, and/or the American military assassinated John Kennedy. He further noted, after the assassination, the KGB investigated Lee Harvey Oswald's time living in Kyiv, Russia, and found evidence that Oswald was a horrible shot. Oswald in no way could have rapid-fired 3 shots so accurately. In fact, according to recently released JFK assassination files from the National Archives and Records on February 20th of 2025, confirms this very fact that Oswald was a terrible shot. My friend Sergei Khrushchev shared this very information with me in 2007. So, who do you think assassinated Kennedy? It is my opinion that Oswald was the fall guy. I believe he was used as a distraction to cover up for the true assassins. Please leave your comments below if you wish, and be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. It will help to grow this channel as I create more content. And thank you for watching Spirits of the Cemetery.